Tonight and last night would not have been possible by the organizing and curatorial efforts of Matt Doyle, who I'll bring up now to introduce Saul on tonight's show.
Thank you, Adam, for that introduction, and thank you all for coming tonight. My name is Matt Doyle, and I'm going to introduce Saul to you all. Saul Levine, born in New Haven, Connecticut, is a maker and advocate of avant-garde film and more recently video. He is currently a professor at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, where he has taught for 30 years and programmed the long-standing Mass Art Film Society. His work has been screened nationally and worldwide, most recently in Shanghai, Paris, and Rotterdam. Based in Boston, he rarely leaves town. I'm so thankful that he did leave town to be with us here tonight. So I'm just going to say something really quickly about the work tonight. We're going to see two pieces. One, the first piece is called Dream Lover Dream, and it is in fact a world premiere. It's a little bit shorter. It's from 2015. And the second film that we're going to see is part of Saul's ongoing Driven series, Boston After Dark, which Saul will take a mini DV tape, which are about 80 minutes long, and record the driver of a car as he or she drives around Boston talking. And so both works are, and the second work is, the Driven is of Joe Gibbons. It's a portrait of the filmmaker and artist Joe Gibbons, who was recently incarcerated for robbing two banks, and is now in Rikers, and any support for his efforts to get out of there. I think that he pled guilty, or he's only going to get a year or something.
Yeah, really, but it's very important to note that he was armed with a video camera when he was robbing both.
Yeah, so, you know.
Filmforum should be all now.
We did a show as a partial fundraiser for him a few months ago. We'll have another one. But.
Yeah. So anyway, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Saul Levine, who's just going to say hi, and there's going to be a Q&A between me and Saul after the screening, if you'd like to stick around. Yeah, so without further ado, Saul Levine.
It's great to be here to see many old faces and some new ones too. So I don't want to add to the hot air in the room. So I'll be very brief, but there are a few things. Joe is actually going to get out, I think, in September soon. He got a year. He was sentenced for a year. He actually was only sentenced for one bank robbery. So. And that we don't have to talk too much about that, but because the film Driven, Joe Gibbons, was made in 2002, around that time when Joe had just begun teaching at MIT, and taught there for 10 years. And Joe is a great artist. And an amazing multimedia artist like Andy Warhol. He worked in many different media. And his work has always pushed the boundaries and limits. The bank robbery is an authentic part of his body of work. It's not like some kid had a lunatic idea to do it. And it came out of the crisis that artists face in America when they get old and poor. So, among other things. I mean, he's also, like I say, a boundary pusher. Anyway, you'll be hearing these works. When I was a child, I had very bad speech impediments and problems. I literally had to learn to speak. So not in the way we all do, but how to make the words come out intelligibly. And so I'm very conscious of people's speech being part of who they are. and the nuances. So for me, a part of the reason I love silent films, and I would probably mainly work silently if I weren't drawn to include words and in portraiture this element of how people form speech and the different changes that we go through in doing that. That's my interest. The other thing that happened that I was going out with a woman named Nancy Golden, who's a great photographer and videographer, and she loved to shoot out the window of cars. I happened to buy a mini DV, I got a mini DV camera, which she fell in love with. And whenever we rode around, I had to shoot out the window. And in doing that, I realized that at night, the mini DV was engineered to produce a cinema noir look. And you could do cinema noir just with the camera. So, I mean, you know, I came of age during that era. And that's the part, and for a lot of reasons, I got into making this series. Okay, I promised already too much hot air.
I kind of just wanted to start, I guess, with a quote that seemed particularly apt to this work and to this whole series by J.G. Ballard, if you guys know the author of Crash. He says, "I think the key image of the 20th century is the man in the motor car. It sums up everything, the elements of speed, drama, aggression, a junction of advertising and consumer goods with the technological landscape, the sense of violence and desire, power and energy, the shared experience of moving together through an elaborately signaled landscape." And I think that for me at least, something that's really at the heart of this work is the relationship that's happening not only between you and the driver, but between DV camera, automobile, and Boston as an urban environment. And I guess for you, given what you were saying as an introduction to this work, you think of yourself in this series and in your later video work as being kind of a medium for other people's speech. And I guess I'm wondering if we think about those interactions and different, as Joe, I guess would say, maybe like extensions, like, you know, somebody who's an extension of yourself. You know, how do you think of yourself as a receiver, medium, or extension of Joe as creating a portrait?
Well, he does that great story where he talks about that thing of identity, of being the twin of the sky. That's true, right? There was this guy who had this confusion. There's another thing I didn't say. In addition to the interest of speech, one of the first films I made was a collaborative film with a guy named Michael Jacobson that I wrote and directed, and he edited and helped me make along the way. And that was Happy Motoring. It was a couple driving around in a car and actually changing the radio, which told the kind of the anecdote. And along with, it was a very stupid film, but they get progressively more sexually involved. There's oral sex and the crash in a montage, but it's not bad. It's not like Murnau's does. That's how Murnau died. They drove off afterwards. It was a tragedy. But I made that film. When I made that film, I realized I was intensely interested in the difference between the interior of the car and the outside. And that there was, I mean, you know, then later on, I mean, a couple of years ago, I read P. Adam Sidney's book where he quotes Emerson, who has a long thing about how railroads, the new ways of conveyance give human beings a new way of seeing the world as you're moving through space. It's actually a great passage. So that's always, I mean, I love what Ballard said. And I mean, and that, you know, I mean, I'm a big fan of the novel Crash. But my father had a gas station. And, you know, until I moved back to Boston, I always, as an adult, as a teenager, I had a car, and I had a car pretty much, I lost my license for a year for speeding, but I always usually had a car, and then I moved to Boston and I couldn't afford it, and it wasn't worth it. So, but I'm attached to that. And, you know, I also love trains. And I think all of this stuff does have a lot to do with film and video, yeah. So this, I mean, partly I did the Drivens out of my Jones for driving, or for being driven, because, you know, the truth of it is, it hardly happens. I'm normally riding around on a bike.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and in a different way, I think here in Los Angeles, I was attracted to showing this work here because, speaking of jonesing for being driven, I think a lot of people in LA end up driving themselves everywhere. You see, it's like there's, you know, everybody's in their own car driving alone. But to return to that relationship between the train, different methods of conveyance, different technologies for moving through space and time, and the relationship, or as metaphors for cinema, I think that, I mean, to my mind, what that brings to mind is, you know, if the train is the figure of the, maybe like the early 20th century and the early cinema, the automobile kind of exists in a little bit more of the interstitial. It's sort of a part of, like, I guess, the stream of the 60s and 70s, that
50s.
50s through, you know, with the individual, like you were saying earlier today, to be able to get up at 4 a.m. and drive wherever you want, right? This is like a mark of individuality or something, or independence of some sort. And I guess I'm interested in maybe even the concomitant development of discourses like psychoanalysis around the individual and the individual's neuroses that are happening across the course of the 20th century. The emphasis on the individual's drive, the individual's speech.
Well, I guess to return, I mean, I am interested in, as in all those noir films I'm talking about, or road movies, the car also is a space of intimacy.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, these are not people driving alone. I mean, in the Dream Lover Dream, one of my directions was, I said, we were talking about character. I said, you can do a character, but don't pretend I'm not there. I'm there, okay?
Yeah.
But I mean, I did good with Joe. I mean, I do practice the I mean, I find that the psychoanalytic technique of keeping your mouth shut to let others do, so that the other person has the impulse to speak, works. And I try and do that in the Drivens. But some of them involve more conversation. I always say the Driven I did with this friend of mine, Uzma Cosme, that she got me to talk. That she had a goal to get me to talk. But then when I really look at it, I see it was me. I didn't keep my money.
Yeah.
So, it becomes something else. I mean, I also spent a lot of time driving alone. When I first came to Boston, I was a delivery boy in my car. That's how I lost the car. I got too many parking tickets. I couldn't pay them. So I drove a lot through Boston alleys and traffic and like talking to myself.
Yeah. And it's interesting to talk about that dynamic, or this woman getting you to speak and this improvisational kind of the way that's sort of a duet, again, one acting as an extension for the other, playing off of another, but through silence, as in like sort of, analytic. And what's interesting to me about that is that there's this way in which, similar to the films we saw last night, where we see in something like Notes After Long Silence these sort of echoes of different images or shapes that kind of go across or cut together very rapidly to create different sorts of images. You find yourself as a viewer of these films in a position where you're finding these repetitions and these structures of speech, and in perhaps even mapping them onto the landscape of the city.
Or architecture.
Yeah.
In the first film, because you can see it. And even somewhat in the second.
And something I hadn't noticed in the first film, in Dream Lover Dream, Luke, who, I didn't introduce Luke, everybody, but I actually met Luke at a party. I played a concert in a basement in Boston. I remember thinking, it was right after I'd returned to Boston, and I remember thinking it was this like wonderful, or this strange moment, because I never really performed in Boston before, and Luke was there. He just popped up out of nowhere. He watched me perform, and he came up to me and he went, "Hey, I've been living in a shed in the back of my parents' house, but I'm starting a tape label, and I want to put your music out." It was very friendly and inviting, and I think something I noticed in that film that I hadn't noticed before is, you see, he actually kind of drives a ring through Harvard Square. He does this sort of like do-si-do around, whereas in the case of Joe, he takes you on a much longer route. He knows what he's doing at every single moment. But I guess to draw that parallel again to or to maybe ask you to speak a little bit about what you see as the relationship between this more open method of drawing out repetition, through leaving the camera running and the long take with the DV, versus in your earlier work, kind of like creating deliberate echoes or repetitions,
Well, yeah, I mean, although Joe's performance is wonderful, but you shouldn't take this as an example of his work. Joe edits. Joe doesn't do 80-minute monologues. This is the only one. I'm a fan in documentary of length, and of getting it all. I love Ulrika Ottinger's Siberian and Mongolian series, where you watch an 8-hour shaman series in real time. Because even though you know that that's a film, that you're missing half, but you're seeing it all. You're not, and in these, every film or every media has certain contracts with the audience, and in this work, my contract is that you're getting it all, as much as I can, I don't know if I'm answering.
No.
Yeah, but there is that same idea of improvisation. I have to think about what I'm doing. And also it's more like a duet, This is more like playing with a band, because I need I'm actually pretty busy and on. In both of, in the second one, Joe is a jerky driver, and I felt like I had been in a fight after the thing. It was a very physically demanding, driven. Not all of them are like that, but this one was really hard. I should also say, this was, when I started this series, I thought of two people as a subject. I thought Joe Gibbons and Kim Kuhn, both of whom are performance artists and video filmmakers. I thought of another filmmaker who and she's who I started with, Tracy McCauley, because she's normally not very rappy. And I was really, I said, am I going to be sitting around in the car with Tracy and it's only going to be her driving around? But it turns out she talked a lot. And that one is very good, and I was glad I started with it. I thought Joe would be easy, but we did. This is the second we did, because Joe couldn't make up and you know, for me, I always tell people, whatever you do, it's going to be okay, because it's not about tabloid, it's not about how good you talk. I mean, I know for the audience it does matter, but for me, in the making of it, these are portraits. And I'm as interested in people's silences, and that's the other reason for not turning the camera off.
Yeah.
Is to get, and I'm interested in the inwardness, when seeing people go inside themselves and then come out, in the different ways people talk differently in different circumstances, especially if they're drawing on memory or improvising, so in actually both of these films, there was some struggle also between me and the subject. Luke initially wanted to do this in as he put it, a comfortable living room, and I thought that would be boring, to tell you the truth, visually. And I thought we should do it at this cafe where I've shot some stuff, because there's a lot going on outside of this thing. And it was snowing, so I thought I would shoot this in the snow, but then circumstances arose. And then Luke gave me a ride in his truck, and I said, oh, I should shoot this in this truck. And we got together, we were going to do it, but it got put off for a week. Oh, it took me a year to get Luke to do this. When I first met him, he told me part of the story, and I said, would you say that on camera? And he said, yes. So he said a lot more on camera than so some of this was a big surprise for me. As we were going out, I said, holy, yeah, you know, I was, I was amazed. I also told Luke, when we got in the car, he put on this music. I said, kill the music. Or if you want, we can start with it, but we're going to turn it down. Nope. I mean, you know, and he was right. It's good. Yeah. It's appropriate. So you know, it's a play between us.
Yeah.
And I like what you say about the fact that you're constantly busy. You know, like don't get it wrong. Like, you're not just sitting there. You're constantly busy as you're in that position. Because there is something about that almost first-person camera that, to me, creates this illusion of a sort of invisibility of the work. And in a lot of ways, whereas, you know, with your Super 8 work, people talk about seeing the tape that's the film is cut together with. With this work, I feel like when I was watching the Joe Gibbons before we saw it tonight, after you sent me the file, I thought to myself, the image disappears. You know, this is what kind of came to my mind. I think that this long duration, there's something about attention and repetition and seeing the same figure and seeing just these movements out the window, where at a certain point, when you're that wrapped up in listening, you know, the sort of auditory component, the image starts to sort of like disappear or feel sort of like it is sort of darker even, or just kind of transparent. In the same way that the work of the camera is invisible, or that the driver at the steering wheel is like, the work is invisible to them as well. So to me, that's
but it's also
a huge part of that.
Them having to drive actually helps.
Yeah.
Because it covers some of their anxiety.
Yeah.
And you know, they're going in and out, as you see with Joe. Oh. I mean, they're going in and out of the act of driving. So for me, that's an important element of the drivens. I've also done other kind of single-shot, long duration things that aren't in the car. I mean, it's not the only way.
Well, there's that one piece too, the point of view. Is the name of it? The piece is shot from that one place in the farm.
On the spot.
On the spot, which also is kind of a longer piece, using longer takes.
A lot of single frames.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of what looks like a long take in that film is really a fake.
Oh.
No, you should see that film. It's not.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Want to open it up to
Yeah. Maybe we could open up to questions there. If that's right. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
Hello. I wanted to ask. You were talking about how the car and the intimacy, which I, as a non-driver and never having driven, I've never been in a car alone in motion, and I really felt that, the intimacy of it. And then, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about it, and the camera, the presence of a camera. So often, you know, when you love film and you like shooting film, you're in these intimate moments, and you want that, you want to capture it, and yet the presence of the camera will so often steal that intimacy from you. So it's like by trying to keep it, you lose it. So how, for you, do you experience in making intimate portraiture and intimate films? I guess I would describe them this, whatever, you know, intimate might not be the right word exactly, but personal, and being in this personal space with someone, but also having this third presence of the camera, and like how just.
Well, you know, I mean, partly with these duration things, I'm partly interested in how people drop in and out of intimacy and where their consciousness shifts to. I think a couple of years ago I was riding to work on my bicycle, and I was actually thinking about editing film. And I often, if I'm editing, I actually do cut sometimes. And I was putting together a series of images, some of which I had shot and some of which I hadn't. And suddenly, and I had lost sight of the road. And I almost got bored because I wasn't, but my mind, one part of my mind saved me. Because I was able to avoid that. I came alert. My unconscious, that's what part of what your unconscious is. It's watching out for you. Especially as you did what I did, tranced out and went inward. And stopped doing, you know, very dangerous thing to do in Boston traffic. So I don't know if I dealt with your your question, yeah, I'm trying to. One of the things I learned also from Warhol, as well as the psychoanalytic technique, a lot of the 60s filmmaking, especially Warhol, the duration thing was about getting people past their projection. You know, where it breaks down. And you see that in Joe. I mean, Joe's a very canny performer, and in fact, Joe did not look like this at the time. He did not wear those kind of clothes, brush his hair that way, and he, especially at the beginning, speaks differently than he would normally. Play, but he's not able to do it continuously for 80 minutes. Some people can, but this is too true to what he's trying to talk about. Joe usually edits, so Joe's work is even funnier or more compressed. And he's interesting in terms of monologue. I once saw him, who's the guy swimming to Cambodia?
Spalding Gray.
Spalding Gray at BFVF, which Joe talks about. You may have been there more than me. You there? Oh, maybe I could have a better memory even than I do. Spalding Gray was doing bits and pieces of monologue, and then he was doing this thing where he brought up somebody from the audience who he thought of really as a foil, right? Not in a mean way, but he asked for a volunteer, or he picked Joe, and Joe went head to head with Spalding Gray. Do you remember? No, but it was interesting to watch Spalding Gray, deal with it, because he's a pretty interesting guy. But Joe did very well.
Do you remember what happened?
I don't remember the details. It was about 1980, 81. What were you doing?
I saw Spalding Gray do interviewing in the audience in Boston.
Yeah.
Were
you at this?
No, it wasn't Joe Gibbons. It was somebody who was really boring. But that's why I was wondering what Joe Gibbons would have done.
No, it wasn't boring. Well, do you remember?
What I remember he did a piece called India and After, where another person would randomly, they would turn to a page in a dictionary and read an entry, and then Spalding would start talking about something that had nothing to do with what this person had just said. And he was remembering like a trip he had taken to India. And I was just totally blown away. I just thought it was absolutely amazing. But maybe there was a second event which I missed.
I think just it must have done different things each evening, because there's a piece called Interviewing the Audience that Saul's describing that he would do with pull different people out of the audience, and that stuff was going to be boring.
Yeah, and Joe wasn't boring, let's put it that way. I wish I remembered. Steve Anker should be here.
Yeah. There's footage of it in one of Joe Gibbons' videos that Filmforum showed recently. So it was filmed, that interaction between Spalding Gray and him. And it does seem like Spalding Gray is irritated that Joe Gibbons is kind of hijacking his event a little bit. And he's going into detail about his bookstore experiences.
No, I mean, unlike the piece Morgan described, I found that Spalding Gray was condescending and was hoping for actually people to be boring so he could show his brilliance.
So I was thinking like what you had said about the
intimacy that it's the way that Joe Gibbons told his stories was a lot more intimate than the other guy who made up, or seemed like a sort of made up dream story that seemed a little more theatrical, feeling like he had practiced saying that before. Like Joe's seemed a lot more how you drive, like, or bike, or walk around a city, and everything, like he said, is a memory around the corner, and every little piece. And he would get to the parts where he's like, oh, I don't have any memories here. I've never been in an ambulance, so except for that time and that other time. And it seems incredibly intimate. Even though he knew you were there, he's obviously comfortable with you, and he's comfortable with the camera as well. And being in the interior space of a car, of his own vehicle, and being in the familiar space of where he's familiar with was, you know, he's obviously was pretty comfortable in the situation.
Yeah, I would just add, to what you said, he's in the driver's seat.
He's what?
In the driver's seat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was interesting, that one part where he's holding the balls. I know Boston very well from biking around a million years there, and that right there was where the bomb went off in the Boston Marathon. Like, and seeing all those really familiar places and making my own connections to where he was. It's really, really great to like travel around.
You know, the next driven I did was of Kim Chewin.
Oh, wow.
And that one is really great. Subsequently to my doing that, Joe, that whole story about jumping the lane, Kim was driving down the Jamaica Way. Kim was in the backseat of a car with her daughter Hazel, driving down the Jamaica Way. Her Hazel's friend's mother, there was two mothers and daughters. A car jumped the lane and drove into them, and Kim broke her pelvis.
Yeah.
And almost, and they said she wouldn't walk again, but she did. So, I mean, when I saw this, I had forgotten that it's like a prediction.
Yeah.
But the Jamaica Way, it's like a scary road.
It's a scary road.
It's a scary road. There's one good thing about it. If you're in an accident, there's sure to be a doctor or a nurse in a few cars. It's all hospital. Yeah. Anyone else?
In your series, do you do ones that aren't in Boston, or is it important that they're all in Boston?
No, not to me. It just had, I did one in Jersey City that, or around Jersey, but that one, the person who I filmed it, I always give people the choice of suppressing it, right? And that person chose to suppress it. So they've all been in Boston, but I'm not hung up about it, but I do sometimes call the series Boston After Dark.
Saul, you should do one here.
Yeah.
Oh, well, if I were here long enough, I would surely do it. I mean, we went to see the Watts Tower this afternoon, and on the drive back, I had the kind of conversation with Matt, or he talked about stuff that would have been very good. No, I mean, it's a car culture all over the world, so I guess I could do it anywhere.
I'm interested in like distance and audio. So I noticed like with the camera angle, like it kind of became this like very conversational, like kind of like conversational kind of like pitch between like, you know, the camera and the person. So I'm wondering, like, I feel like when most people get into cars, you turn on your music, and then like when the music is off, it's usually for something very serious, you know. Like you turn off the top 40s when it's like, oh, you're talking in a very serious way. You just turn it down, but like the music was completely off. And so I'm like wondering, like, how was it like editing the audio, and also like about like Joe was doing editing, like how did that work?
Like I said, in these pieces, my contract with the audience is there's little or no post-production. Now, I do, you know, there are ins and outs, right? Maybe. I usually don't even do that. With the first piece, my big decision was to leave, was whether or not to leave in, you want to go to the 7 stars, or at the end. Whether that was part of it. And I decided it was, because we were, but that's about so I'm not, I mean, I am not a fan, I love editing, actually, but I'm not a fan of the amount of post-production in the world of media making. Digital media demands more and more post-production, and I find that boring. And also, I find it very problematic. I mean, I'm still waiting for a camera that really you can do stuff as it happens. Or you can make, I'd like a video camera that did real single frames. I would like it even better, because you could do it, to have very fast image and sound grabs so that I can compose with that in the camera. So the answer is nothing. What you see is what I got. Although that's not quite true. There are some things in it, like some of that dropout or blue screen. I'm not sure where that came from. It may be part of, like, I made this from a beta I made this particular thing from a beta SP thing, because I can't find the original. I'm still looking for the original mini DVD. So I don't know if I'm answering what you asked. I mean, in simple question is no editing, no software. But I'm trying to think about that as I'm doing. I mean, that's why I'm working hard.
Yeah, I guess what I was mainly asking was about this idea of like distance between conversations. Like when you're sitting in a car, like when we're two people having conversations, very like made distance between the two people. While like if you're having a conversation kind of like out and about, you can kind of decide that. Like I can step back, I can step forward. So I'm wondering like what that did to the audio itself, because it was very much like him talking to the audience. Like, does that make? I don't even know if my question makes sense, but like I'm asking like what did that do to like the film itself for you, like in the meaning making behind it?
That is the meaning.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's why I chose this format. I mean, that is actually my choice, and not the people. I mean, in fact, someone like Luke or Joe would want, if it were their work, they would have edited it. On the other hand, Luke, and maybe what you resent about it, Joe. Luke, because the first time I met Luke, he told me the story about lucid dreaming. His story, and that was a year before I made the film. So he did have a lot of time to think about it. I thought he did great, I mean, actually, in his performance. So he but it wasn't, I mean, I thought a little bit, if I were Joe Gibbons, or me at another stage of my life, I might have claimed, like John Cassavetes, that this was all scripted. I typed it all out and sent them a script, and they did a pretty good job. They slipped up once in a while. But they're also playing to me. You know, Joe especially he's talking to me. We know each other a long time. The other guy I know very much less well. So, but this choice of format does, for better or worse, that making that choice changes is what you're talking about in your question. So that choice leaves me with this thing. It's not my only approach to making. I mean, I do dense editing, and even I've never done a dense sound design. Although I once made a film with no image that's just stereo.
I mean, just gathering from maybe some of the different comments, I'm not sure if it's true, but it's almost like we assume that the camera is anthropomorphized to a certain extent. And it was getting me to think, I was curious as to how much you see the camera as an extension of the automobile itself, and maybe a fixture of, like, the anatomy of the car.
I think the camera, because I'm also fairly much letting it run on automatic, right? I'm thinking the camera has its own mechanisms that are revealed during the time, because it's struggling to make, it's often on the brink of image making. If the camera had a consciousness, it would say, what am I supposed to focus on? What's going on here? You know, why is it so dark? Don't you know about lighting?
Well, I feel like that's such an analogy, you know, like, insofar as the car is also a mechanism that reveals us to the space, like the urban spaces.
No, that's all true. I mean, I'm interested in reflexivity of media, yeah, and like Emerson said, the car, the car is a conveyance. I'm interested in another series I've been doing concurrently with The Driven, somewhat inspired by writings of visionary mystics. And so in those series of films, when you see a car or a boat, I mean, in my own mind, nobody in the audience thinks of it this way, but I'm thinking of those as chariots to heaven, as chariots to experience, and you know, I think that there's I'm interested in the idea of conveyance.
Maybe we have time for one more question. Is it?
Maybe, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I have just a question about memory, and whether it's encouraged by you in sort of setting the parameters of this encounter with to have your subject talk about memory so extensively and really have a sort of anchor in the place that they're driving around in, or in the other pieces, whether memory is less an important theme. And I guess partially why I think about that is the way that you use Super 8 and in some of the films that we looked at last night, and also the choice of something like DV. These are both sort of technologies that are, on the one hand, sort of democratic image-making forms, but they're also ways of externalizing memory and sort of offloading our memory function onto archival media. And so I'm wondering if the way that you're conceiving this project has something to do with memory and media and spatializing memory in a certain way, I guess.
Yes. I mean, people, because of the duration of these things, people don't always refer to the landscape in the way Joe does. Many people, I've done about 13 or 14 of these, often people do, the most boring of them is when people talk about where they're going in the traffic. But people often talk about the landscape or the cityscape in terms of memory, but not always, or sometimes the memories, like in Kim's thing, it's a lot of memories from other things, from other times. They don't refer only to Boston or only to where they are at the moment. Sometimes they're talking, they're telling me stuff about themselves that I didn't know, like you do when you're writing a rhyme. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I guess you don't necessarily go into it with the assumption that part of the contract that you're making is that the person is going to talk about their memories, but
no,
in a way it's your choice.
Or tell the truth. Mm-hmm. Or anything. I mean, if people actually want to be silent, when I first started, I would say to them, anything you do is okay. It's a portrait. I mean, on the other hand, you know, people have egos and vanity. And things. But often people are withholding. Very common. I mean, when I do this, people are very cagey. They don't want to say anything. Because they know I'm going to be in Los Angeles showing it. I actually tell people, don't worry, no one ever shows my work. which is true, and which is true over time, but not absolutely true. I mean, this is the most, Dream Lover Dream is online. It has about 300 or 400 hits, or a couple of hundred. I don't know. I haven't looked at it. But what you said before about, yeah, I mean, my choice of media does have to do with that. With media that's used to by people to remember small things or intimate, like, you know, the old phrase, home movies, but other kinds of things as well. So I agree. I mean, the answer to your question is really yes. Okay.
Maybe on that note, with a resounding yes. We'll close the 2 nights of Saul Levine's first screening series in Los Angeles. And as Saul mentioned, he's on Vimeo. You can see there's probably 4 or 5 of the Driven series up there. Not Joe Gibbons, but if anybody wants to go and watch any more of that work, Saul's made it available online. And yeah, thank you all for coming. Let's